Picture the scene. The air in the Place de la Révolution is thick with the smell of sweat, unwashed bodies, and a vicious, electric anticipation. It's a cold morning, October 16, 1793, but the heat from a massive mob steams in the autumn air. They've come for a spectacle. They've come for blood. They've come for the head of a queen. At the center of it all, a woman stands on a wooden platform. Her hair, once a marvel of powdered artistry, has been cut short and unadorned. Her hands are bound tightly. She's wearing a simple white shift, the coarse fabric of final, calculated insult to a life once lived in silk and satin. This is Marie Antoinette. Or, as her captors now call her, the Widow Capet. She's been dragged through the streets of Paris in an open cart, a ride for common criminals, enduring the jeers, the spit, and the raw, unfiltered hatred of a city that once adored her. Stripped of her crown, her husband, her children, and her dignity, she has nothing left. She is a symbol, and her destruction is the revolution's final, brutal sacrament. She walks towards the executioner, her back straight, a phantom of royal bearing in a world turned upside down. As she moves towards the towering frame of the guillotine, her foot slips. She stumbles, accidentally treading on the executioner's boot. The crowd stirs, hungry for any sign of weakness, any final stumble. But the woman doesn't cry out. She doesn't beg or curse her fate. She looks at the man who is about to end her life, and she speaks. Her last words aren't a plea, a prayer, or a protest. They are an apology. "Pardon me, sir," she says, her voice clear in the charged silence. "I did not mean to do it." Why would a woman condemned to death apologize? Why would a queen, stripped of everything, offer a final, quiet courtesy to her own executioner? To find the answer, we have to look at the impossible journey that brought her there, a journey from the gilded cage of a palace to the rat-infested dark of a prison cell. It's the story of a girl who became a queen who became a villain, and a villain who, in her final moments, found a way to become human again. To understand the woman on the scaffold, we have to go back nearly 3 decades, to a world away from the grime and fury of revolutionary Paris. We have to go to the Hofburg Palace in Vienna, the heart of the mighty Habsburg Empire. It's here, on November 2, 1755, that the 15th child of Empress Maria Theresa is born. She's a pretty, cheerful archduchess, nicknamed Antoinette, and she's the favorite child of her father, the Holy Roman Emperor Francis I. Her childhood, while royal, is relatively carefree. She isn't a brilliant student, she prefers games to grammar and laughter to Latin, and her social grace far outshines her academic discipline. By all accounts, she's a charming, lovable, and somewhat unserious young girl. But the fate of a princess is never her own. Her life is a bargaining chip. Since her birth, a grand political project has been underway, a diplomatic revolution meant to end centuries of hostility between the two great powers of Europe, the House of Bourbon in France and the House of Habsburg in Austria. The seal on this new alliance is to be a marriage. The groom is Louis Auguste, the Dauphin of France, grandson and heir to King Louis XV. The bride, chosen from a plentiful supply of Austrian archduchesses, will be the young Maria Antonia. She's just 14 years old. In May of 1770, she begins her journey from Vienna to Versailles. At the border, on a neutral island in the Rhine River, a ceremony of almost cruel symbolism takes place. She is systematically stripped of everything Austrian. Her clothes, her attendants, her pet dog, everything connecting her to her past is taken away. She has to enter France as a purely French Dauphine. It's her first lesson in the totalizing demands of her new role. When she emerges from the pavilion, dressed in the opulent fashion of the French court, she is no longer Maria Antonia. She is Marie Antoinette. Her arrival at the Palace of Versailles is like stepping into another universe. Versailles isn't just a palace, it's a machine, a glittering, suffocating mechanism of power and etiquette. Every moment of the day, from waking to sleeping, is a public performance governed by a labyrinth of ancient rules. The simple act of getting dressed, the lever, could involve dozens of high-ranking aristocrats, all jostling for the honor of passing the Dauphine her chemise. Having grown up in the far less rigid court of Vienna, Marie Antoinette finds the ritual of Versailles baffling and alienating. Her husband, the 15-year-old Dauphin Louis, offers little comfort. He's a shy, serious boy, more interested in locksmithing and hunting than in his young bride. He is well-meaning but awkward, and their marriage will go unconsummated for 7 long years, a fact that becomes a subject of court gossip and cruel political satire, placing immense pressure on the teenage girl. Lonely and adrift in this sea of ritual and expectation, Marie Antoinette did what any young person with near-limitless resources might do: she sought escape. She found it in fashion, in parties, in gambling, and in a tight-knit circle of friends. She became a trendsetter, popularizing towering, elaborate hairstyles called poufs, extravagant gowns, and lavish nighttime gatherings. She was young, beautiful, and desperate for the affection and normalcy her public life denied her. Her husband, who became King Louis XVI in 1774, indulged her. One of his most significant gifts was the Petit Trianon, a small chateau on the grounds of Versailles. Here, Marie Antoinette created her own private world. She renovated it in the latest style, built a charming theatre, and, most famously, commissioned a rustic farm, the Hameau de la Reine. This Queen's Hamlet was a picturesque, idealized village with a working farm, a dairy, and a mill. Here, dressed in simple muslin dresses, she and her friends could play at being shepherdesses, a fantasy of simple country life. To her, it was an innocent, private retreat. To the public, however, it was something else entirely. As whispers and pamphlets began to circulate, this fantasy farm became a symbol of a queen so detached from reality that she had to build a toy village to pretend to understand her people. Her private escape was recast as a public insult. The gilded cage was beautiful, but its bars were beginning to cast long, dark shadows. While Marie Antoinette was building her fantasy world, the real world outside the palace gates was starting to crumble. France was teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Decades of extravagant spending by previous kings, plus the immense cost of supporting the American Revolution against Great Britain, had plunged the nation into a catastrophic debt crisis. To make matters worse, a series of bad harvests led to severe grain shortages, and the price of bread, the staple food for most of the population, skyrocketed. People were starving. And when people are starving, they look for someone to blame. The public didn't see the complex economic factors driving their misery. They saw the dazzling, expensive, and foreign-born queen. Marie Antoinette, with her lavish parties and designer gowns, became the perfect scapegoat. Pamphlets, the social media of the 18th century, began to appear, filled with vicious caricatures and salacious rumors. They called her Madame Deficit, portraying her as a frivolous airhead who was single-handedly spending the kingdom into ruin. And while her spending was certainly high, it was a drop in the ocean compared to the state's military costs. But the truth didn't matter. The perception was everything. It was in this toxic atmosphere that the most famous phrase she never said was born: "Let them eat cake." The story goes that on being told her subjects had no bread, the queen callously replied, "Chou ils mangent de la brioche, let them eat brioche," an enriched, expensive bread. This quote became the ultimate symbol of her supposed indifference. But she never actually said it. In fact, versions of the story had been floating around for decades, often attached to other royal figures. It was a well-worn piece of anti-aristocratic propaganda that was conveniently pinned on the increasingly despised queen. Her private letters actually show a person often concerned with the plight of the poor, but these charitable acts were drowned out by the rising tide of public anger. Then came the scandal that would utterly destroy what was left of her reputation, the affair of the diamond necklace. It started with the Parisian jewelers, Baymer and Bassenge. Years earlier, they had been commissioned by the old king, Louis XV, to create a necklace for his mistress. They spent years sourcing the most perfect diamonds, assembling a masterpiece of 647 stones weighing nearly 2,800 carats. But before it was finished, Louis XV died. The jewelers were left with an absurdly expensive necklace and no buyer. They offered it to Louis XVI for Marie Antoinette, but she wisely turned it down, reportedly saying that the kingdom needed more ships, not more diamonds. Enter the villains. First is the Cardinal de Rohan, an ambitious nobleman desperate to win back the Queen's favor. Second is the master manipulator, a con artist calling herself the Comtesse de la Motte. The Comtesse befriended the Cardinal, convincing him she was a close confidant of the Queen. She told Rohan that Marie Antoinette secretly wanted the diamond necklace but couldn't buy it publicly. The Comtesse suggested that if Rohan acquired it on the Queen's behalf, he would instantly regain her favor. To seal the deal, the Comtesse arranged a nighttime meeting in the gardens of Versailles, hiring a prostitute who resembled the Queen to meet with Rohan, hand him a rose, and whisper words of encouragement. The Cardinal, completely duped, was ecstatic. He signed a contract for 1.6 million livres and handed the priceless necklace over to the Comtesse. She and her husband immediately dismantled it and began selling the diamonds on the black market. The scheme fell apart when the first payment came due. The jewelers went to the Queen, who was utterly bewildered. She knew nothing about it. When the full story came out, King Louis XVI was furious and had the Cardinal de Rohan publicly arrested. A sensational trial followed. The Comtesse de la Motte was found guilty and imprisoned. But in a stunning verdict, the Cardinal de Rohan was acquitted. The public saw this as a victory against the hated Queen. The implication was that even if she wasn't directly involved, she must have done something to encourage it. The affair confirmed every dark rumor about her, that she was deceitful, promiscuous, and ruinously extravagant. Though completely innocent, Marie Antoinette was found guilty in the court of public opinion. The scandal was a catastrophe from which her reputation would never recover. The seeds of discontent had taken root, and they were about to bear bitter, revolutionary fruit. The year is 1789. The anger simmering in the streets of Paris finally boils over. On July 14, revolutionaries stormed the Bastille, a medieval fortress and a potent symbol of royal authority. The French Revolution has begun. At Versailles, the news is met with disbelief and panic. Courtiers begin to flee the country, but the king and queen remain, trapped, seemingly unable to grasp the magnitude of what's been unleashed. The breaking point comes on October 5, fueled by bread shortages and rumors of royal soldiers disrespecting the revolution. A massive crowd gathers. It begins with the tough, sharp-tongued market women of Paris, the Poissards. One woman starts beating a drum, and a movement is born. The crowd swells to thousands, an army of women armed with knives, pikes, and muskets. They have two demands: bread, and for the king to come to Paris. Chanting and dragging cannons, they marched the 12 miles to Versailles in a driving rain. That evening, they surround the palace. The king meets with a small delegation and promises to distribute food. For a moment, it seems the crisis might be averted. But in the early hours, a more radical group finds an unlocked gate and storms the palace, searching for the queen's apartments. "We want to cut off her head," they scream, "tear out her heart." 2 of her bodyguards are killed defending her door. Marie Antoinette barely escapes, running barefoot through hidden corridors to the king's chambers, moments before the mob breaks into her bedroom and slashes her empty bed to ribbons. The royal family is now cornered. From a balcony, the massive crowd demands to see them. The king appears, and then the crowd chants for the queen. Knowing she is the primary target, Marie Antoinette walks out onto the balcony alone. She stands before the armed mob, expecting to be shot. She says nothing. She simply stands there, vulnerable, and bows her head. Her extraordinary courage has a stunning effect. The mob, momentarily silenced, lowers their weapons. Some even shout, "Vive la reine!" Long live the queen! But their main demand hasn't changed. The crowd roars, "To Paris!" Later that day, the royal family leaves Versailles for the last time, their carriage escorted by the triumphant mob, who carry the heads of the slain guards on pikes. Their destination is the Tuileries Palace in Paris. The king and queen are no longer monarchs, they are prisoners. For 2 years, they live under house arrest. While King Louis XVI sinks into a deep depression, Marie Antoinette becomes the stronger of the two, secretly corresponding with allies to rally support for a counter-revolution. The plan is to flee Paris and travel to a loyalist fortress near the border. The escape, planned for the night of June 20, 1791, was plagued by terrible decisions. The king and queen insisted the whole family travel together in a large, slow, and very conspicuous luxury coach. They were disguised, the king as a valet, the queen as a governess, but their regal bearing was hard to hide. The journey was a cascade of delays and errors. They left hours behind schedule and missed their military escorts. Yet, they almost made it. But in the town of Saint Menehould, a local postmaster named Jean-Baptiste Drouet recognized the king from his portrait on French money. Drouet sounded the alarm and rode ahead. The royal family's lumbering coach was stopped in the small town of Varennes, just 30 miles from their goal. Their desperate flight was over. Humiliated, they were forced to return to Paris. This time, the crowds that lined the streets watched them pass in eerie silence. The National Assembly had declared that anyone who applauded the king would be flogged, and anyone who insulted him would be hanged. The flight to Varennes was the monarchy's death knell. It shattered any illusion that the king was a willing participant in the new constitutional monarchy. Now, he was seen as a traitor who had tried to abandon his nation. Calls for the abolition of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic grew louder. The failed escape to Varennes accelerated the revolution's radical momentum. In August 1792, a revolutionary mob stormed the Tuileries Palace, massacring the king's Swiss guards. The royal family fled to the Legislative Assembly, but found no protection. The monarchy was officially abolished, and France was declared a republic. King Louis XVI was stripped of his title and became known simply as Citizen Louis Capet. The family was imprisoned in the Temple, a medieval fortress in Paris. In January 1793, Louis was put on trial for treason. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. On January 21, he was executed by guillotine. From her prison window, Marie Antoinette heard the cannons fire and knew her husband was dead. She was now the widow Capet, the despised relic of a dead regime. But her most profound agony was still to come. In early July, revolutionary officials entered her cell. They had come to take her son, the 8-year-old Louis Charles, the boy who would have been King Louis XVII. Marie Antoinette's reaction was primal. She shielded the boy with her body for 2 hours, refusing to let him go. But she was powerless. The boy was forcibly torn from her arms. She would never see him again. He was taken to be re-educated by a radical cobbler and would die in prison 2 years later from neglect and abuse. For Marie Antoinette, this was a wound deeper than any the revolution had yet inflicted. On the night of August 1, 1793, the guards came for her. She was transferred, alone, to the most feared prison in Paris, the Conciergerie. Known as the antechamber to the guillotine, it was a grim, Gothic fortress, the central holding depot for the Revolutionary Tribunal. She was placed in a small, damp, ground-floor cell. For 76 days, this was her world. The woman who once commanded the splendors of Versailles now had only a simple bed, a table, and a chair. There was no privacy. A screen separated her from 2 guards who were ordered to watch her day and night. This constant, humiliating surveillance was a deliberate psychological torture. Despite the horror of her situation, she maintained a quiet, unnerving composure. She mended her worn black dress. She paced her small cell. Her hair had turned prematurely white from the stress. She was 37 years old, but looked much older. On October 14, Marie Antoinette was brought before the Revolutionary Tribunal. It wasn't a trial, it was political theater. Her 2 court-appointed lawyers were given less than a day to prepare. The prosecutor, Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, laid out the charges, a collection of wild accusations and outright fabrications. She was accused of high treason, squandering the treasury, and conspiring with foreign powers. Then, the prosecutor unleashed the most vile charge of all. Citing coerced testimony from her traumatized young son, the radical journalist Jacques Hébert accused Marie Antoinette of incest. Throughout the trial, Marie Antoinette had remained calm. But at this, she was stunned into silence. When the judge pressed her for a response, she rose to her feet and turned to address the gallery, packed with the very Parisian women who once stormed her palace. "If I have not replied," she said, her voice filled with a mother's anguish, "it is because nature itself refuses to respond to such a charge laid against a mother." Then, looking directly at the women in the crowd, she made her appeal, "I appeal to all mothers who are present here." The effect in the courtroom was electric. The women in the gallery, her sworn enemies, began to murmur in sympathy. For a fleeting moment, she had broken through the wall of political hatred and connected with them on a fundamental human level. But it changed nothing. The verdict was written before the trial ever began. In the early morning of October 16, the jury returned. The verdict was guilty on all counts. The sentence was death. When asked if she had anything to say, she simply shook her head. Back in her cell, she declined a meal and refused the state-appointed priest. Given pen and paper, she wrote a long, final letter to her sister-in-law. It wasn't a letter of anger or self-pity. It was a farewell to her children, whom she wasn't allowed to see. "I am calm," she wrote, "as people are whose conscience is clear. I sincerely ask pardon of God for all the faults I may have committed during my life." She asked her children not to seek revenge for her death. Having written the letter, she lay down on her bed and waited for the dawn. The dawn of October 16, 1793, breaks cold and grey. The executioner, Charles-Henri Sanson, arrives in her cell. He is not a monster, but a professional, the fourth generation of his family to serve as state executioner. The final humiliations begin. She is ordered to change into a plain white chemise, the simple shift worn by all condemned prisoners, in full view of her guards. She turns her back to them, a final, futile gesture of modesty. Sanson steps forward and cuts off her graying hair at the nape of her neck. Then, he binds her wrists with coarse rope, so tightly she winces. At 11 o'clock, she is led out into the courtyard. Waiting for her is not a closed carriage, but a tombereau, an open wooden cart used to haul rubble and criminals. This is the final insult, a spectacle designed to expose her completely to the crowd's hatred. She sits on a wooden plank, her back to the horse, as the cart begins its slow, hour-long journey to the Place de la Révolution. The city has turned out in force to see the Austrian she-wolf. The crowd is a roaring sea of hatred. They press in, screaming insults, spitting, jeering. And through it all, Marie Antoinette sits ramrod straight. Her face is pale and thin, but her expression is impassive. She doesn't cry. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't look at the mob. She holds her head high, a statue of dignity amidst a carnival of hate. The great artist of the Revolution, Jacques-Louis David, sits on a balcony and sketches her as she passes, capturing her gaunt, proud profile. At last, the cart reaches the square, dominated by the colossal machine of death, the guillotine. Marie Antoinette steps down, unaided. She ignores the priest, the roaring crowd, and looks only at the steep wooden steps leading up to the platform. She walks up the steps with a steady pace. Her tormentors have taken everything, but in these last few steps, she is in control. She isn't being dragged to her death, she is walking to it. At the top, as she turns towards the executioner, her foot accidentally brushes against his. She has stepped on his boot. It's a tiny, insignificant event. But her reaction is what has echoed through history. She pauses. She looks at Charles-Henri Sanson. And in a clear, polite voice, she utters her final words. "Pardonnez-moi, monsieur. Je ne l'ai pas fait exprès. Pardon me, sir." I did not mean to do it. It is an apology. A simple, human courtesy. An act of grace offered to the man about to kill her. In that single, astonishing moment, she ceases to be the widow Capet, a symbol of hatred. She is a person, exhibiting a level of composure that belonged to a world her executioners had destroyed but could not entirely extinguish. She is quickly seized and strapped to the plank. At precisely 12:15 in the afternoon, the blade falls. An assistant pulls her head from the basket and holds it up for the crowd. The mob roars. The spectacle is over. The story of Marie Antoinette is a stark reminder that history isn't just a collection of dates and events, but a deeply human drama. It's a story about how a person can be built into a symbol of everything glamorous, and then torn down and remade into a symbol of everything corrupt. But in the end, her story is also about what remains when everything is stripped away. When the crown, the titles, the wealth, and the family are all gone, what is left? For Marie Antoinette, what was left was a core of resilience her tormentors could not break. They wanted her to weep, to beg, to scream. She gave them nothing. Instead, in her last living moment on earth, she gave her executioner an apology. It was a final, quiet, and utterly defiant act of humanity. Her last words were not the words of a broken victim. They were the words of a woman who, in the face of unimaginable horror, remembered her grace, and in doing so, secured a legacy far more powerful than any crown she ever wore. The final words of historical figures often provide a fascinating window into their lives and the times they lived in. Marie Antoinette's are among the most surprising. Which historical figure's last words do you find most fascinating or powerful? Share your thoughts in the comments below, we'd love to hear from you. And as always, thank you for watching.